Dying Mustang Foal cried for help. What the mountain man did next will break your heart. Snow whips across a lonely canyon. A rugged mountain man hears a cry in the wind, not human, but desperate. He finds a wild foal, ribs showing, dying. In the snow, he swore never to care again, but he cannot walk away. By the fire, the foal stirs and so does his buried heart. But then a stranger arrives. An Apache woman says the foal isn't his to keep it, carries the hopes of her people, and in the shadows, settlers whisper plans to destroy the wild herds forever. What begins as one man's choice to save a helpless creature soon sparks a fight for land, honor, and faith. He can protect the foal, but at what cost? When bullets fly and secrets surface, will a broken mountain man find the courage to open his heart again or lose everything he has left? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The wind howled through the canyon like a mournful spirit driving needles of snow against Kurt McGraw's weathered face. His boots crunched through the fresh powder as he made his way back to his cabin, arms aching from hours of swinging the axe. The bundle of split logs shifted against his shoulder, the rough bark catching on his wool coat. Inside his humble cabin, Kurt dropped the wood beside the stone fireplace with a dull thud. The flames cast dancing shadows on the log walls, but they did little to warm the emptiness that had taken root in his heart these past 5 years. He settled into his familiar chair, the leather worn smooth from countless solitary evenings, the tin plate of beans barely registered as he ate, his thoughts drifting, as they often did, to Sarah and little James. Their graves lay beneath the great oak on the ranch he'd abandoned, unable to bear the sight of the empty cradle. The quiet kitchen where Sarah's laugh would never ring again. Up here in the mountains, at least the silence made sense. A cry pierced the night, rising above the moaning wind. Kurt's head snapped up, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. He listened, barely breathing. There it came again, not quite a wolf's howl, something different, something desperate. "Ain't my concern," he muttered, but his legs were already carrying him to the door. He lifted the heavy iron latch and grabbed his lantern, its yellow light creating a small circle of visibility in the swirling snow. The cry led him down into the shallow canyon, where the wind cut less fiercely. His lantern beam swept across the ground until it caught something dark against the white, a small form half buried in a drift. As he drew closer, his throat tightened. A foal no more than a few months old, its bay coat dusted with snow and sides heaving with labored breaths. Kurt searched the darkness, but there was no sign of the Mustang herd. Already their tracks were filling with fresh snow leading off into the vast nothing. The foal's eyes, large and liquid brown, fixed on him with a mix of fear and desperate hope that struck him like a physical blow. The animal tried to rise at his approach, front legs scrambling weakly before giving out. Each wheezing breath created small clouds in the freezing air. Kurt knew he should turn back. He'd sworn off caring for anything after losing his family. Caring only led to pain when the thing you loved was taken away. But as he stood there, the memory of another small form wrapped in blankets rose unbidden. James had been so still at the end, the fever burning through his tiny body despite everything Kurt and Sarah had tried. He'd been helpless then, watching his son slip away. But this time, "Aw, hell," Kurt growled, shrugging off his heavy coat. His hands shook slightly as he wrapped it around the trembling foal. The animal was lighter than he expected, its ribs sharp beneath his fingers as he lifted it into his arms. Those eyes never left his face, holding a trust he hadn't earned, wasn't sure he wanted. The trek back to the cabin seemed twice as long with his burden. Snow gathered on his shirt, melting against his skin, but he barely felt the cold. Each step was carefully placed, mindful of the precious cargo he carried. The foal's head rested against his shoulder, its breath warm against his neck. "Don't you go getting any ideas," he told it gruffly as they finally reached the cabin door. "This ain't permanent, just until the storm passes." But even as he spoke the words, something long dormant stirred in his chest, an ache both familiar and frightening. Inside, he laid the foal on the braided rug before the fire, his coat still wrapped around it. The animal's eyes were growing, heavy exhaustion finally winning out over fear. Kurt found himself settling down beside it, one hand resting lightly on its heaving side. "Reckon we both could use some rest," he murmured, watching the firelight play across the foal's face. He told himself it was just for tonight, just until the storm passed. But as the wind continued to howl outside and the foal's breathing gradually steadied, Kurt McGrath faced an uncomfortable truth. His wall of solitude had just developed its first crack, and he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to patch it. The night stretched on, marked by the popping of logs in the fireplace and the soft sounds of shared breath. For the first time in years, the cabin felt a little less empty, little less cold. Kurt kept his vigil, knowing sleep wouldn't come easily tonight, not with the weight of responsibility. Settling back onto shoulders that had tried so hard to shrug it off, Kurt knelt beside the foal, his rough hands gentle as he arranged blankets. Around its shivering form, the firelight cast warm shadows across its bay coat, now beginning to dry from the snow. Its breathing came in shallow gasps that twisted something deep in his chest, a pain he thought he'd buried years ago. "I gotta get some strength in you," he muttered, moving to the kitchen area. His hands shook slightly as he mixed oats with warm milk from his morning's provisions, stirring until it formed a thin mash. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath his boots as he returned to the foal's side. "Easy now," he coaxed, dipping his fingers into the mixture. The foal's nostrils flared at the scent, but its head remained heavy against the blankets. Kurt carefully brought his fingers to its mouth, letting a few drops fall between its lips. "That's it, just a little at a time." For over an hour, he repeated, the process: dip, drip, wait. Sometimes the foal would turn away, and Kurt would find himself humming softly. The same lullaby he'd sung to James during long nights of teething. The memory hit him like a physical blow, but he forced himself to keep going. Drop by drop, the bowl slowly emptied through the night. Kurt maintained his vigil. Every time the fire began to die, he added another log, unwilling to let the temperature drop even slightly. The foal's breathing remained shallow, each intake of air a struggle that reminded him too much of James's final hours. He'd sat just like this then, counting each precious breath, praying for morning to bring improvement. When the last breath had come, so quiet he'd almost missed it, something in him had died too. "Not this time," he whispered fiercely, checking the foal's pulse again. "You hear me? Not this time." The hours crept by. Kurt massaged the foal's legs, remembering what his father had taught him about keeping circulation flowing in weak animals. His hands worked methodically, from hoof to shoulder, telling stories as he went about the mountains, about his childhood on the ranch, about anything that would keep the silence at bay. Dawn found him slumped in his chair, eyes burning with exhaustion. The foal still breathed, its chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed slightly stronger than before. Kurt ran a hand over his face, feeling the scratch of 3-day stubble. "Much obliged," he whispered hoarsely. Whom, God, fate, or the foal's own determination? He wasn't sure. 5 years of bitter silence toward the Almighty made prayer feel strange on his tongue, but gratitude slipped out anyway. Through the day, Kurt kept up his routine of massage and mash feeding. He found himself talking more than he had in years, explaining each task as if the foal could understand. "Gotta work these muscles," he said, carefully bending a front leg. "Otherwise, they'll stiffen up worse than old Jake's joints in wintertime." He was my father's horse, he added, surprised by how icily the memories came now, ornery as they come, but loyal to the bone. The sun began its descent, painting the cabin's interior in deep amber tones. Kurt had just finished another feeding when he felt movement under his hand. The foal's head lifted slightly, its muzzle pressing into his palm. A soft nickering sound, weak but clear, broke the evening quiet. The laugh burst from Kurt's chest before he could stop it, rusty and strange to his own ears. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed before the fever took his family. Surely. The sound startled him so much, he nearly pulled his hand away, but the foal pressed closer, seeking warmth. "Well now," he said, voice rough with emotion, "reckon you're feeling a bit better." His fingers found the spot behind its ears, and the foal's eyes drifted half-closed in contentment. Through the cabin's window, Kurt noticed the snow had finally stopped. Moonlight spilled across the mountainside, turning the fresh powder into a field of diamonds. The peaks stood sharp and clear against the night sky, their eternal presence somehow comforting. He'd come to these mountains seeking isolation, a place where nothing could touch his wounded heart. Instead, he'd found this, a fragile creature who needed him, and with it, the first spark of hope he'd felt in years. The foal nickered again, softer this time, as sleep began to overtake it. Its breath was warm against Kurt's palm, each inhale stronger than the last. The moonlight poured through the window, bathing them both in its silver glow, and for the first time in a very long while. Patterns across the cabin's single window, Kurt pulled his coat tight and grabbed the empty water pail. The foal lay sleeping near the fire, its breathing steadier now, though still weak. Outside, his boots crunched through fresh snow as he made his way to the creek. The water ran swift beneath a thick crust of ice. Kurt set down his pail and hefted the axe from his shoulder, studying the frozen surface for the thinnest spot. The first strike rang out like a gunshot in the morning quiet. He worked methodically, chips of ice flying with each blow until water finally splashed dark against white. Filling the pail took time. The current tried to snatch it from his grip. As he straightened, something caught his eye. Fresh tracks in the snow, definitely human, circled near his cabin. His muscles tensed, and retrieved his rifle from where it leaned. Against a nearby pine, the tracks were clear. Someone wearing moccasins had been studying his cabin, and recently, a figure emerged from the trees, a young woman, in a patchy dress, her dark hair in traditional braids. She carried no visible weapon, but her stance was wary as she approached. "That's far enough," Kurt called out, keeping his rifle pointed at the ground but ready. She stopped, holding up empty hands. "I mean no harm." Kurt's grip tightened. On his rifle, the one half dead in the snow. "You found it. Sacred or not, I found it freezing to death." Kurt said sharply, "Would have died if I hadn't brought it in." "I am Talanez," she said, taking another careful step forward. "My tribe has tended these Mustang herds for generations. They are more than just horses to us. They carry our prayers, our stories." Kurt frowned. The foal had survived the night, under his care, but it was still desperately weak. "Well, it's alive, barely, but it's in no shape to be moved." "I do not ask to move it," Tala said. Everything in him resisted letting a stranger into his sanctuary, but he couldn't deny the foal needed all the help it could get. Finally, he lowered his rifle completely. "No sudden moves," he warned, leading the way back to the cabin. Inside, the foal lifted its head at their entrance. Tala's breath caught as she saw it lying there. She murmured something in Apache, a prayer or blessing perhaps, before kneeling beside it. From a pouch at her waist, she drew out bundles of dried herbs. "These will help its breathing," she explained, crushing leaves between her fingers, "and these strengthen the spirit." Kurt watched from his position by the door, torn between mistrust and curiosity. "I've been giving it milk and oats." Him that white men weren't the only ones with knowledge worth having. The day passed in an uneasy partnership. Tala showed Kurt how to brew the herbs into a tea, how to massage the foal's chest to ease its breathing. He demonstrated his own techniques for keeping its circulation flowing. They spoke little beyond what was necessary, each watching the other, with careful attention. As evening approached, their efforts began to show results. The foal's eyes were brighter, and it managed to stand briefly before lying down again. "It grows stronger," Tala said, gathering her remaining herbs. "I will return tomorrow with more medicine." Kurt straightened from adding wood to the fire. "Now wait a minute. I never agreed to daily visits. The foal belongs to my people," she said firmly. "We have searched for it since the storm. I cannot abandon it now. I'm the one who found it," Kurt countered. "Saved its life." The foal nickered softly, drawing both their gazes. In that moment, they shared the same expression of concern, of connection to the small creature that had brought them together. Finally, Kurt sighed, a slight smile touching her lips. "The foal has two guardians now," she said. "Perhaps that is what the spirits intended." Kurt watched her disappear into the gathering dusk, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. Climbed higher, warming the cabin's weathered walls. His hands, rough from years of mountain work, moved with surprising gentleness as he stirred the mashdot across the room. Tala knelt beside the foal, her voice carrying soft and low in an Apache melody. Her palm rested on the creature's chest, rising and falling with each breath. The song seemed to fill the cabin with something ancient and peaceful, making Kurt's usual restlessness settle despite himself. Her song, the foal's ears twitched forward, listening. Its dark eyes, still fevered, but clearer than yesterday, was a victory. The morning passed this way, Kurt preparing feed, while Tala applied her herbs and sang her healing songs. Neither spoke much, but their movements fell into an easy rhythm. Near midday, the foal began struggling to rise. Its spindly legs trembled with effort, and Kurt quickly moved to support its chest. Tala steadied its hindquarters, murmuring encouragement in Apache. "Easy now," Kurt cautioned as the foal wavered. "One step at a time." For a brief moment, the foal stood, swaying between them. Its tail swished once before its strength gave out. Kurt watched her tend to the foal with such care, such purpose. The question that had been gnawing at him all day finally burst free. "Why is this one so important to your people? What makes it special?" Tala's hand stilled. She was quiet so long, Kurt thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of deep worry. "The soldiers at the fort plan to round up all the Mustang herds," she said. "They have made deals with men who will slaughter them for profit." "What?" Kurt straightened, frowning. "These are free-ranging horses. They can't just, they can, they will." Tala's jaw tightened. "Unless we can prove the herds are sacred to my people, protected by old treaties. And this foal," Kurt gestured to their patient. "It was born with markings our elders prophesied, the white flash like lightning on its chest, the 4 black legs." Tala touched these places gently. "Proof that the Mustangs must be protected, must be protected." Kurt ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "One foal won't change their minds. The army wants profit. They don't care about signs or prophecies. Hope can change minds," Tala insisted. "Even small hope, if it is strong enough." She met his eyes steadily. "You have lost hope before. I see it in how you live, alone in these mountains. But hope found you again through this foal." Kurt turned away sharply, her words striking too close to his carefully guarded pain. The memories rose unbidden, his wife's smile, his son's tiny fingers gripping his thumb, the fever that took them both. He'd buried hope with them, fled to these mountains to escape it. The foal nickered softly, drawing his attention back. It had rolled onto its chest, watching him with those large, trusting eyes. Without meaning to, he found himself moving to check its breathing, to run a gentle hand along its neck. "I can't promise anything," he said finally, still not looking. "At Tala, even if it lives, the agency might not listen. But you will help us try." The hope in her voice made him wince. He knew too well how hope could turn to ashes, and yet the foal pressed its muzzle into his palm, warm and alive against his calloused skin. "I'll consider it," he said gruffly. "First, we have to keep it alive." Tala nodded, understanding this was as much as he could offer right now. She resumed her quiet singing, the melody twining with the foal's soft breathing and the crackle of the fire. Kurt returned to preparing the evening feed, his movements measured and careful. Through the cabin's window, the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains. Soon, Tala would leave for her own people's camp, and Kurt would be alone again with the foal. But something had shifted, like spring ice breaking up on the river. The solitude that had been his shield now felt somehow different, less certain, painted the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Kurt tightened the cinch on his saddle, his horse stamping restlessly in the crisp morning air. He'd planned to make the supply run alone, but Tala had appeared just as he finished his coffee. "I'm coming with you," she'd announced, her tone leaving. "No room for argument. The foal needs special herbs, and I don't trust you to choose right." Now she sat straight-backed on her pony, scanning the trail ahead. Kurt checked the cabin door one last time, making sure it was secure. Through the window, he could see the foal sleeping peacefully under its nest of blankets. "It'll be fine," Tala said, reading his concern. "I gave it medicine that will keep it sleeping most of the day." Kurt grunted and swung into his saddle. The horses picked their way carefully through the canyon, hooves crunching in the fresh snow. Walls of red rock rose on either side, dusted white like sugar on desert bread. The morning silence wrapped around them, broken only by the soft jingle of bridle bits and the occasional call of a winter bird. The town of Eagle's Bend came into view as they rounded the last bend. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the telegraph wire hummed in the wind. Kurt felt Tala tense beside him as they approached the first buildings. People stopped to stare as they rode down the main street. Women drew their children closer, while men watched with narrow eyes. Kurt had grown used to being the strange mountain man who kept to himself. But today, the hostility wasn't aimed at him. They dismounted outside Jensen's general store. Kurt tied both horses, noticing how Tala's fingers worried the edge of her shawl. "Won't take long," he said gruffly. Inside, Mrs. Jensen was helping another customer. Her eyes widened at the sight of Tala, but she managed a tight smile at Kurt. "Mr. McGraw, been a while." "Need feed and some salve," Kurt said, moving to the counter. Behind him, Tala examined the shelves of medicines, ignoring the whispers that followed her movements. "Savage girl shouldn't be in here," a woman hissed to her friend, probably stealing. Kurt's jaw tightened, but Tala kept her head high, selecting several packets of herbs with careful dignity. The whispers grew, spreading like poison through the store. As Kurt paid for their supplies, the door banged open. Tom Wheeler, red-faced and whiskey-scented despite the early hour, stumbled in his bloodshot eyes fixed on Tala. "Well, look here," he slurred. "Indians got money to spend now. Probably stole it like they stole my cattle last month. That's enough," Wheeler, Kurt warned, stepping between them, defending her. "McGrath," Wheeler sneered. "Maybe you've gone native up in them mountains, living with savages now." Kurt's hands curled into fists. "The lady is my guest. She's done nothing to you, lady," Wheeler spat on the floor. "These heathens." Ain't Kurt moved faster than anyone expected. In 2 strides, he had Wheeler by the collar, pushing him back against the door. "Apologize," he growled. The store went silent. Wheeler's face purpled, but something in Kurt's eyes made him swallow hard. "Meant no harm," he mumbled. Kurt released him with a slight shove. "Get out." Kurt gathered their supplies without meeting anyone's eyes. Tala paid for her herbs, her movements precise and controlled. The ride back was tense and quiet. The sun climbed higher, making the snow gleam painfully bright. Kurt wanted to say something, but words had never been his strong point. What could he say about the ugliness they'd witnessed? As they approached the cabin, a sharp whinny broke the silence. The foal had heard their horses. Tala's face softened at the sound, and Kurt felt something ease in his chest. Inside, the foal tried to stand, eager for their return. Tala went straight to it, checking its condition while Kurt stored the supplies. The familiar routine of caring for their patient helped wash away the bitter taste of town. That evening, Kurt stirred a pot of rabbit stew while Tala mixed fresh medicine for the foal. The cabin was warm, filled with the scent of herbs and cooking meat. Outside, snow began falling again, soft and steady. "Thank you," Tala said quietly, not looking up from her work. "For what you did today." Kurt shifted uncomfortably. "Weren't right how they treated you?" "No," she agreed, but many would have stayed silent. The foal nickered softly, nudging Tala's hand. She smiled, and Kurt found himself noticing how it transformed her serious face. He served the stew in his 2 best bowls, which weren't very good, but they held food well enough. They ate in companionable silence, watching the foal drift to sleep. The fire crackled, pushing back the gathering dark. Something had changed between them, Kurt realized. The walls they'd built of suspicion and old hurts had developed hairline cracks. Letting in a thin light of understanding, the days stretched like taffy, marked by the slow improvement of the foal. Kurt woke before dawn each morning, stoking the cabin's fire and preparing warm mash. Tala arrived as the sun touched the peaks, her footsteps crunching in the crusty snow. They worked in shifts, trading sleep for vigilance. On the 3rd morning, the foal managed to stand on its own. Its legs trembled like new spring saplings, but it held steady. Tala's eyes brightened at the sight. "He needs a name," she said, running her hand along its dark coat. "In my language, we would call him Little Thunder. See how his hooves stamp when he's hungry." Like far-off storm clouds, Kurt watched the foal tap its feet impatiently, waiting for its morning feed. "Little Thunder," he repeated slowly. "Reckon that fits him just fine." They settled into a rhythm, Kurt taking the evening watch while Tala handled mornings. Between feedings, they sat by the fire, the silence gradually giving way to conversation. Kurt found himself listening more than he had in years. "The soldiers came in spring," Tala said one evening, her fingers working dried herbs into powder. "They said our hunting grounds belonged to settlers now. Each season, they push us into smaller spaces. She paused, looking into the flames. The Mustangs run free where we once did. That's why they matter so much. They remember the old ways, the open land. Kurt added wood to the fire, considering her words. Ain't right, what they did to your people. No, she agreed. But we endure. We pray. We remember. Prayer, Kurt muttered, the word bitter in his mouth. Did plenty of that when Sarah took sick. Her and the baby both burning with fever. Prayed till my throat was raw. He stood abruptly. Moving to check on Little Thunder didn't do no good. Tala watched him gentle the foal, noting how his rough hands turned soft. Perhaps the Creator answered differently than you wished. By taking them, Kurt's voice cracked. What kind of answer is that? My grandmother says grief is like a river in flood, Tala replied quietly. It destroys what was, but also carries seeds to new ground. We pray not to change the Creator's mind, but to find strength for the journey. Kurt said nothing, but his shoulders eased slightly. Little Thunder pressed against him, seeking attention. The foal's trust, despite its own losses, stirred something deep in Kurt's chest. Days passed. The sun grew stronger, beginning to soften the snow's grip on the land. One morning Tala suggested they try taking Little Thunder outside. Thunder outside. He needs to build strength, she said, wrapping an old blanket around the foal. Just a short walk. Kurt nodded, helping her guide Little Thunder to the cabin door. The foal hesitated at the threshold, blinking in the bright light. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, coating everything in clean white. Carefully, they led him onto the packed trail Kurt maintained. Little Thunder's first steps were uncertain. His hooves slipped, and twice he nearly fell. But each time he caught himself, determined to keep moving. They walked him in a small circle, supporting him when needed. Look how he fights, Tala said proudly. He knows life is worth the struggle. Kurt watched the foal regain its footing after another stumble. The sight of its persistence, its refusal to give up, touched something he'd thought long dead. Maybe there's fight left in us all, he murmured. Tala's smile was gentle, understanding. She'd seen the change growing in him, like spring beneath winter's crust. There's always fight left, she said, and hope, if we choose to see it. They led Little Thunder back inside, the foal tired but stronger for the effort. Kurt wrapped him in dry blankets, while Tala prepared a warm mash with her healing herbs. Outside, a Chinook wind began to blow, carrying hints of the thaw to come. Evening, Kurt found himself humming as he worked an old hymn his mother used to sing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd made music of any kind. The tune felt rusty in his throat, but somehow right. Little Thunder dozed nearby, his breathing steady and strong. When Tala arrived for her watch, she heard the last notes fade. She said nothing about it, but her eyes held a warmth that made Kurt duck his head, embarrassed yet not entirely uncomfortable. Rest well, she said, settling into her usual chair. Tomorrow we'll try another walk. Little Thunder grows stronger each day. Kurt nodded, gathering his coat. At the door, he paused, looking back at the foal and the woman who had brought change. Into his solitary world, the bitterness he'd carried so long felt lighter somehow, like snow beginning to melt. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains when hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Kurt grabbed his rifle, motioning for Tala to stay with Little Thunder. Through frost-covered windows, he watched a lone rider approach. Recognizing the blue uniform of an agency messenger, the young man dismounted, his horse blowing steam in the cold air. Message from Officer Pike, he announced, pulling a folded paper from his coat. Army's moving ahead of schedule. Kurt's stomach tightened as he read the notice. The words blurred together, but their meaning was clear. Cavalry units would begin rounding up Mustang herds in 7 days. His hands crushed the paper's edges. Inside the cabin, Tala saw his expression and knew. What did they say? 1 week. Kurt answered, handing her the notice. They're starting the roundup in 1 week. Tala's face hardened as she read. Little Thunder pressed against her leg, sensing her distress. Then we must act now, she said. The tribal council meets in 3 days. If they see Little Thunder, see how the Mustangs connect our peoples, they might stand against this. Kurt paced the cabin's length, boots scuffing wooden planks. The council. That means riding into the reservation, dealing with the agency. He shook his head. Ain't my fight. It became your fight the night you saved him, Tala countered, stroking Little Thunder's neck. These horses are my people's heritage. Once they're gone, another piece of our freedom dies. The foal whinnied softly, bumping Kurt's hand with its nose. He looked down at the creature he'd pulled from death's edge, remembering its determination. To live, even if I agree, he's barely walking. How do we get him there? Tala smiled. We teach him like any child. First steps lead to longer journeys. They spent the morning fashioning a makeshift halter from soft leather strips. Tala worked, the material with practiced hands, showing Kurt how to tie knots that would hold without pinching. Little Thunder fidgeted as they fitted it, but settled when Tala hummed a gentle melody. Now comes the hard part, she said, taking one side of the halter while Kurt held the other. He must learn to follow. Step by patient step, they coaxed Little Thunder around the cabin's interior. The foal resisted at first, planting his hooves and tossing his head. But Tala's quiet voice and Kurt's steady hands gradually earned his trust. By midday, he was walking between them, accepting gentle guidance. Good boy, Kurt found himself murmuring, surprised by the pride in his voice. You're getting it now? They practiced through the afternoon, leading Little Thunder in larger circles outside the cabin. The foal grew stronger with each round, his steps more confident. As sunset painted the snow in amber light, they returned inside, all three tired but accomplished. Tala stoked the fire while Kurt prepared their evening meal. The familiar routine felt different now, charged with purpose. Over bowls of beans and cornbread, they planned the journey to the council. 2 days to reach the reservation, Tala calculated, tracing the route on a worn map. Then 1 day too, present our case. Kurt nodded, studying the distance. Rough country between here and there. Little Thunder will need rest stops. I will teach you something else, Tala said, setting aside her empty bowl. A song my people sing for strength on long journeys. The horses know it too. She began softly, her voice carrying ancient words that seemed to dance with the firelight. Kurt listened, trying to catch the rhythm. After several repetitions, Tala motioned for him to join. His first attempts were awkward, stumbling over unfamiliar sounds. But gradually, he found the pattern, his deeper voice blending with hers. Little Thunder's ears pricked forward, drawn to the harmony dot outside. Coyotes began their evening chorus, their wild voices drifting through the canyon. Once such sounds had made the foal tremble, now he stood steady, secured by the presence of his unlikely family. Kurt fell silent, suddenly aware of how natural it felt, sharing songs, sharing purpose, sharing hope. The walls he'd built around his heart seemed thinner, worn down by days of caring for this small creature and working alongside this remarkable woman. You learn quickly, Tala said, her eyes reflecting firelight and something warmer. Had a good teacher, Kurt replied gruffly. Embarrassed by the praise, they settled into comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of the challenge ahead. Little Thunder dozed between them, his breaths deep and even. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows. On the cabin walls, tomorrow they would begin preparations for the journey. Maps to study, supplies to gather, strength to build. But tonight, in this moment, they were simply three beings bound together by chance and choice. Finding shelter in each other's presence, dawn brought a crisp mountain morning as Kurt and Tala began preparations for their journey. Kurt pulled supplies from his storage chest while Tala sorted through her medicine pouch. The cabin, once Kurt's lonely refuge, now hummed with purposeful activity. We'll need more of these blankets, Kurt said, folding thick wool coverings. Nights get bitter cold in the open. He packed jerky wrapped in oilcloth, enough to last. Several days, each item went into his worn saddlebags with careful consideration. Tala arranged herbs in small buckskin pouches, explaining each one's purpose. This strengthens tired muscles, she said, holding up dried leaves, and this calms fear. Her fingers worked swiftly, measuring portions with practiced ease. Little Thunder watched them from his corner, nibbling at fresh hay by mid-morning. Their preparations were complete. Kurt led his horse from the lean-to, while Tala secured their packs. Little Thunder balked at first sight of the larger animal, but Tala's gentle song steadied him. They set out under clear skies, taking turns leading the foal between them. The going was slow. Little Thunder's legs, though stronger, still trembled on rocky ground. Every few hundred yards, they stopped to let him rest. Kurt found himself speaking quiet encouragement, the words coming easier each time. "That's it, little one," he murmured, as the foal navigated a tricky slope. "Steady now." Tala watched him with knowing eyes. "You have a good way with him," Kurt shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just don't want him falling." They made camp. That evening, beneath towering pines, the branches offering shelter from the wind. Kurt built a small fire while Tala tended to Little Thunder's legs, massaging them with herb-infused oil. The foal dozed, standing up, head drooping over a simple meal of jerky and hard bread. Their conversation meandered, like a creek finding its path. Tala spoke of her childhood, eyes distant with memory. The Mustangs would come down from the high meadows in spring, she said, warming her hands by the fire. We children would run with them, feeling their power in the earth. They taught us freedom before we knew its name. Kurt listened, seeing the scene in his mind. After a while, he found himself sharing his own memories, ones he'd locked away for. "Years Sarah loved to laugh," he said softly, speaking of his wife. Everything delighted her. Sunrise, wildflowers, our son's first kicks before he was born. His voice roughened. "Some days, I can barely remember the sound of it." Tala touched his arm briefly, a gesture of understanding. Joy leaves deep tracks in our hearts. Even when covered by snow, the path remains. The path remains. They fell silent, watching sparks rise toward stars. Little Thunder shifted closer to the fire's warmth. Standing between them like a bridge across their different worlds, morning brought stronger legs and steadier steps. The foal managed longer, stretches without resting, his confidence growing with each mile. They crossed a shallow stream, Little Thunder splashing with unexpected playfulness. "Look how far he's come," Tala said, joy brightening her face. "He will stand proud before the council. They will see his spirit." Kurt found himself studying her expression, the way hope lit her features. Something stirred in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth. He thought of his cabin, once a fortress of solitude, now feeling strangely empty without their presence. "Reckon he's not the only one getting stronger," Kurt said quietly, more to himself than Tala. They walked on through morning light, Little Thunder's hooves marking the trail between them. Each step carried them closer to the council, to confrontation with those who would destroy the herds. But Kurt realized his thoughts were turning beyond that immediate challenge. He imagined his cabin alive with movement and purpose, not just survival. He pictured more sunrises shared in comfortable silence, more evenings filled with Apache songs and quiet understanding. Little Thunder stumbled slightly, and both Kurt and Tala moved instantly to steady him. Their hands met on the foal's shoulder, lingered for a moment, then withdrew. Neither spoke, but something shifted in the space between them. They followed, walking beside each other, their shadows merging on the trail ahead. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tribal council grounds as Kurt and Tala approached with Little Thunder. Scattered groups of Apache families paused in their activities, turning to watch. Children pointed and whispered, their eyes wide at the sight of the foal walking steadily between the unlikely pair. Tala led them toward a circle of elders seated beneath a weathered canvas awning. Their faces remained impassive, though Kurt noticed subtle shifts in posture as they drew nearer. Agency Officer Samuel Pike sat among them, his neat uniform a stark contrast to the worn blankets and traditional garments of the Apache leaders. Thunder's hooves pressed into soft earth as they entered the circle. Though tired from the journey, the foal held its head high, dark eyes bright with curiosity. A murmur rippled through the gathering crowd as they recognized markings similar to those of the sacred herd. "My people," Tala began, in a clear voice that carried across the grounds, "I bring before you a sign of hope." She gestured to Little Thunder, who stood quietly beside her. This foal was found near death in the winter storms. Through prayer and care, it has returned to strength. Officer Pike cleared his throat. "Miss Nez, we have discussed this matter. The Army's orders regarding the Mustang herds are quite clear." With respect, Tala continued, "Our stories teach that the Mustangs carry the spirits of our ancestors. They are not merely animals to be rounded up and sold for profit." The officer shuffled through papers in his lap. "Regulations state that unclaimed horses on government land—" "I found him dying in the snow," Kurt interrupted, stepping forward. His voice was rough with emotion. ribs showing through his hide, breath failing, but he fought. Every hour, every day, he fought to live. The elders leaned forward slightly, their attention shifting to the mountain man who had lived alone for so long. Kurt felt their scrutiny, but pressed on, drawing strength from Tala's presence beside him. I've seen creatures give up, seen the light go out of their eyes. But this one, he touched Little Thunder's neck gently. Something kept his spirit burning. Maybe it was your prayers, your beliefs about these horses being sacred. I reckon there's truth in that, seeing how he survived. One of the eldest women spoke in Apache, and Tala translated. She asks if you believe our ways now. After living apart for so long, Kurt met the woman's weathered gaze. I believe what I've witnessed. This foal brought life back to my cabin, brought healing I didn't know I needed. Seems to me that's something worth protecting. Officer Pike sighed heavily. Sentiment aside, there are procedures. There is also wisdom in listening. One of the male elders interjected in careful English. When signs appear, even the mighty river must bend its course. The council members conferred quietly among themselves while the crowd pressed closer. Little Thunder stayed calm, occasionally nuzzling Tala's hand. Kurt watched the officer's face, seeing conflict beneath his bureaucratic exterior. The deliberations continued as shadows lengthened across the grounds. Finally, the council elder raised his hand for attention. We will consider all that has been said. Tomorrow, we will speak further. As the gathering dispersed, Tala led Kurt and Little Thunder to a small camp at the edge of the grounds. She built a fire with practiced ease, while Kurt settled the foal on a bed of fresh grass. The flames cast dancing light across their faces as evening deepened into night. They sat close together, sharing warm tea and quiet thoughts. Little Thunder dozed between them, his head resting trustingly in Tala's lap. She stroked his forelock with gentle fingers while humming softly. Kurt felt the tension of the day slowly releasing from his shoulders. The fire's warmth, the peaceful sound of Tala's voice, the solid presence of the foal, it all wove together into something that felt remarkably like belonging. For the first time in years, the weight of grief didn't press quite so heavily on his heart. Thank you, Tala said softly, for speaking to the council. Reckon I needed to hear them too. He glanced at her, seeing starlight reflected in her dark eyes. Never thought I'd find peace again, least of all here. Little Thunder shifted in his sleep, sighing contentedly. Tala smiled down at the foal, then back at Kurt. Understanding passed between them, warm as the fire's glow. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, this moment held all the promise of redemption. They sat together as night deepened. Night wrapped the camp in silver moonlight and shadow. Most of the Apache families had retired to their lodges, leaving only the soft crackle of dying fires. Kurt lay on his bedroll near Little Thunder, unable to sleep. The day's council meeting weighed heavy on his mind. Tala dozed nearby, her blanket rising and falling with steady breaths. A twig snapped in the darkness. Kurt's eyes flew open. Years of mountain living had taught him to trust his instincts. He rose slowly, scanning the shadows between the lodges. At first, he saw nothing but the usual nighttime movements of the campadog shifting in its sleep, smoke rising from banked fires. Then he caught at a flash of movement, deliberate and furtive. A figure crouched low, moving toward their small camp. Moonlight glinted off something metallic in the stranger's hands. He recognized the man's face in the dim light. Jenkins, a settler who'd been vocal about his hatred of the Apache people and their claims to the land. The man's eyes blazed with a jealous fury that made Kurt's blood run cold without thinking. Kurt launched himself forward just as Jenkins' finger tightened on the trigger. The shot cracked through the night like thunder. White-hot pain exploded in Kurt's shoulder as he threw himself between the rifle and the foal. He crashed to the ground, his vision swimming with dark spots. Screams erupted across the camp. Kurt tried to push himself up, but his left arm wouldn't respond. Warm blood soaked through his shirt, spreading across his chest. Through blurring vision, he saw Jenkins stumble backward, knocking over a lit lantern near one of the lodges. Flames leaped up the dry canvas, casting wild shadows. People poured from their shelters, shouting in both Apache and English. Kurt struggled to focus, searching for Tala and Little Thunder through the chaos. He glimpsed her in the firelight, her face stark with terror as she grabbed Little Thunder's makeshift halter. The foal danced nervously, eyes rolling at the noise and fire. Tala looked back once at Kurt's crumpled form, anguish etched across her features. In that moment's hesitation, he tried to call out to her, but only managed a weak cough that tasted of copper go, he whispered, though she couldn't hear him. Keep him safe. As if she understood his thoughts, Tala turned and fled into the darkness, leading Little Thunder away from the chaos. The foal's white legs flashed once in the moonlight. Before they vanished into the shadows beyond the camp, Kurt's vision dimmed further. He was vaguely aware of people gathering around him, the council elders, their faces grave in the flickering light. Someone pressed a cloth against his shoulder, sending fresh waves of agony through his chest. He tried to explain about Jenkins, about protecting the foal, but his tongue felt thick and unresponsive. Be still, one of the elders commanded in heavily accented English. The bullet must come out. But Kurt was already sliding into darkness, unable to fight the pull of unconsciousness. His last thought was of Tala's face, twisted in grief as she disappeared into the night. He had failed her, failed Little Thunder, failed the fragile trust they had built between their peoples. The camp's peace lay shattered like the broken lantern, its hopes scattered like sparks in the wind. As Kurt slipped away, he heard the elders, speaking rapidly in Apache, their tones urgent and dismayed. The night that had held such promise now echoed with confusion and fear. Everything they had worked for seemed to be unraveling in the space of a single gunshot. The last thing Kurt felt before consciousness fled completely was a deep sense of loss, not for his own injury, but for the dream of unity that had been so close within their grasp. Then darkness took him, and he knew no more. Kurt floated in a sea of pain, waves of fire rolling through his shoulder. Time lost meaning as fever gripped him, pulling him under into memories he'd tried so hard to forget. Sarah's face swam before him, pale against their bedroom pillows. Her golden hair spread like a halo, damp with fever sweat. "Promise me?" Sarah whispered, her fingers trembling as they clutched his hand. "Promise you won't let bitterness poison your heart, Kurt. God hasn't abandoned us." In his delirium, Kurt tried to turn away from the memory, but it held him fast. Sarah's eyes, bright with fever yet filled with love, locked onto his. "Live with faith," she breathed. "There's so much love left in the world. Don't shut it out." The memory shifted, blurred. Kurt surfaced briefly to feel gentle hands pressing something cool and damp against his burning shoulder. An elderly Apache woman bent over him, her weathered face creased with concentration as she packed herbs against his wound. The pungent smell of medicinal plants filled his nostrils before darkness pulled him under again. Miles away, in the deep shadows of the forest, Tala huddled against a fallen log. Little Thunder pressed close to her side, his warm breath steaming in the cold dawn air. Her cheeks were wet with tears she couldn't stop, no matter how she tried to be strong. "Grandfather Spirit," she sang softly in Apache, her voice breaking. "Guide his soul to peace. Let him find rest among the stars." The prayer song caught in her throat. She had seen Kurt fall, seen the blood spreading across his shirt. In her heart, she believed him gone. Her arm, the foal's touch, steadied her, reminding her of all they had yet to accomplish. Kurt had believed in their cause enough to die for it. She couldn't let that sacrifice be in vain. Tala's hands moved automatically, checking Little Thunder's legs. For strain from their hurried flight, the foal had grown stronger during their days of care, but he was still vulnerable, just like the dream of peace between their peoples. "We are alone now, little one," she whispered, stroking his fuzzy neck, "but we must be brave." As the sky began to lighten, painting the treetops in pale gold, Tala rose stiffly to her feet. Her people's teachings told her that dawn was a time of renewal, of fresh beginnings. She would honor Kurt's memory by carrying their shared mission. "Forward come," she called softly to Little Thunder. The foal followed willingly as she began walking toward the agency grounds. Her steps were heavy with grief, but her spine was straight. The Mustang herds still needed saving. She would stand before the agency officer alone and make him see the sacred worth of these wild horses with each step. Memories of the past days flooded back Kurt's, gentle hands tending the foal, his rare laugh when Little Thunder first stood, the way his eyes had softened when she taught him Apache songs. Tears threatened again, but she blinked them back. There would be time for mourning later. Little Thunder stumbled slightly on a root, and Tala steadied him with practiced hands. "Careful little warrior," she murmured. The foal's trust in her touched something deep in her heart. He represented, reminding her of mornings at Kurt's cabin. She had watched him change during those days, seen the ice around his heart beginning to thaw. Now she would never know what might have grown from those tender beginnings. "I will be strong enough for both of us," she promised the morning air. Little Thunder's hoofbeats made a steady rhythm beside her, marking time with her footsteps. Together, they moved forward, carrying the weight of dreams that now rested solely on her shoulders. The agency grounds lay ahead. Beyond the next ridge, Tala paused, gathering her courage. She might stand alone before them, but she carried the strength of her people's prayers, Kurt's sacrifice, and Little Thunder's fighting spirit. It would have to be enough. Kurt's eyes fluttered open to dim lamplight. Every breath sent daggers through his shoulder, but he was alive. He blinked, trying to focus on the low timber ceiling above him. "Welcome back to the living," a gravelly voice said in accented English. The elderly Apache woman who had been tending his wound leaned into view, her silver hair bound in traditional braids. "You have been walking between worlds for 3 days." Kurt tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. The woman helped him sip water from a tin cup, her weathered hands steady and sure. "Why?" he managed to rasp. "Why help me, the elders?" Dark eyes crinkled at the corners. "The Creator preserved you for a reason, Kurt McGrath. Your heart shielded that foal without thought for yourself. Such sacrifice carries meaning." Kurt's good hand clutched at the blanket covering him. "Tala," he whispered. "The foal they fled into the night. The elder said softly, 'The girl believes you dead.'" The words hit Kurt like a physical blow. Somewhere out there, Tala was alone, carrying their shared burden of hope by herself. The thought of her grief, her solitude, twisted in his chest worse than the bullet wound. Despite the fire in his shoulder, Kurt pushed himself upright. The room spun sickeningly, but he gritted his teeth. "Have to find them?" he ground out. "You are too weak," the elder protested, but there was respect in her eyes. "Don't matter." Kurt swung his legs over the side of the bed, fighting waves of dizziness. "They need me." The woman studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She helped him dress, binding his arm carefully in a sling made from soft deerskin. Every movement was agony, but Kurt focused on Tala's face in his mind. On Little Thunder's trust, his horse waited outside, saddled by one of the elder's grandsons. Kurt's first attempt to mount ended with him doubled over, gasping. The second try, he made it, though sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort. "The agency grounds," the elder told him. "That is where she will take the foal. But the snow comes again." She gestured at the heavy clouds gathering above the mountains. Kurt nodded his thanks. As he turned his horse toward the trail, the elder called after him. "Remember why the Creator spared you, Kurt McGraw. There is purpose in your pain." Words followed him as he rode slowly through the pines. Each hoofbeat jarred his wound, but he welcomed the pain. It kept him alert, focused. The miles stretched endless before him, and the temperature dropped as afternoon faded toward evening. For the first time in years, Kurt found himself praying. The words came hesitant at first, rusty from disuse. "Lord," he whispered through gritted teeth, "I'm sorry. Sorry for turning my back. Sorry for the bitterness." Snow began falling in light flakes, catching in his horse's mane. "I reckon you kept me alive for a reason. Give me strength to make it right." The prayer felt strange on his lips, yet somehow right, like coming home after a long absence. Kurt thought of Sarah's final plea for him to keep faith. He'd failed her then, letting grief poison his heart. He wouldn't fail again. His horse plodded steadily onward as darkness gathered. The snow fell harder now, but Kurt refused to stop. Each mile brought fresh waves of pain, yet he pressed on, drawing strength. From a well he'd thought, long, dry. The night deepened around him, but Kurt kept riding. He had lost too much time to fever already. Somewhere ahead, Tala carried their shared dream alone. He would find her. Together, they would face whatever came. Snow continued falling softly through the darkness, but Kurt barely noticed it anymore. His whole world had narrowed to the steady rhythm of his horse's gait, the burning in his shoulder, and the fierce determination that drove him forward. Mile after endless mile, he was no longer the bitter man who had hidden from life in his mountain cabin. that Kurt McGraw had died from the bullet meant for Little Thunder. The man who rode through the snowy night was someone who had rediscovered faith, purpose, and the courage to care again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the agency grounds as soldiers lined up on horseback, ready to begin the Mustang roundup. Dust swirled around their boots while they checked their rifles and tightened saddle straps. Agency Officer Pike stood on the wooden platform, reviewing his orders one final time. Tala stepped forward. Little Thunder pressed. Close to her side, the foal's coat gleamed in the early light, no longer the sickly creature Kurt had found in the snow. Her voice rang clear across the grounds, carrying the ancient songs of her people. The melody spoke of horses running free, of wisdom past, down through generations of hope that refused to die. This foal is proof of the sacred bond between my people and the Mustangs, Tala declared, her hand steady on Little Thunder's neck. They are not just animals to be slaughtered. They are our brothers, our history. Pike shook his head, unmoved. I have my orders, Miss Nez. The roundup begins now. He raised his hand to signal the soldiers. Suddenly, a commotion stirred at the edge of the crowd. Kurt McGraw emerged, slumped in his saddle, his arm bound and shirt stained with blood. Gasps rippled through the gathering as he dismounted, stumbling but determined. That foal! It was dying in the snow. Any man here would have left it. But God had other plans. He moved closer, each step an effort. I've spent years cursing mercy, running from hope. This little horse taught me different. Tala's eyes filled with tears as Kurt joined her, standing straight despite his wound. Little Thunder pressed between them, connecting them. Look at this foal, Kurt continued, addressing Pike directly. It survived because two people from different worlds chose to care. If that ain't proof of second chances, I don't know what is. The crowd had gone silent. Even the soldiers lowered their rifles, moved by the sight before them, the wounded man, the Apache woman, and the foal that had brought them together. Pike studied the papers in his hands, then looked at Little Thunder. Standing proud between Kurt and Tala, something shifted in his expression. The roundup is postponed, he announced finally. Pending further review, Little Thunder lifted his head high as if blessing the decision. The morning light caught his mane, turning it to gold, while hope spread across the agency grounds. Like a sunrise, the days that followed brought a gentle peace to the Colorado highlands. Herds of wild mustangs dotted the valleys again, their dark shapes moving freely against the snow. The council's decision held firm, and the soldiers withdrew, leaving the lands quiet except for the sound of hoofbeats and wind. In Kurt's cabin, warmth and healing filled the once lonely space. Tala tended his wounded shoulder with skilled hands. Applying poultices of herbs gathered from the winter-touched earth, the pain slowly eased, replaced by a deeper healing that went beyond just flesh and bone. You need to rest more, Tala would say, pushing him back when he tried to do too much. Kurt would grumble, but comply, secretly grateful for her care. The quiet moments between them grew comfortable, like well-worn leather. Where once Kurt's door had stood half-closed against the world, it now opened wide to welcome Tala's people. Apache elders came to share stories and wisdom, while children played near the hearth. The cabin filled with the scent of cooking meat and the sound of shared laughter. In the evenings, prayers rose in two languages, blending together like smoke. From the same fire, one clear morning, Kurt stood outside, watching Little Thunder dance across the snow-covered meadow. The foal had grown strong, its coat gleaming with health, its legs sure and steady where once they had trembled. Thank you, Lord, Kurt whispered, the words no longer bitter on his tongue, for giving me back my heart. Tala joined him on the porch, her shoulder touching his. The elders say when a soul heals, it makes room for others to heal too, she said softly. Kurt took her hand, feeling its warmth against his palm. Together, they walked to the edge of the clearing where Little Thunder played. The foal trotted, over-nuzzling them both. Before springing away in a burst of joy, sunlight caught the snow-covered peaks, turning them to diamond. Kurt remembered how those same mountains had once seemed as cold and empty as his grief. Now they shone with promise, like pages of a new story waiting to be written. I never thought I'd feel whole again, Kurt said, squeezing Tala's hand. Figured that part of me died with Sarah and the baby. Tala's fingers tightened around his. The Creator gives us second chances if we are brave enough to take them. Little Thunder wheeled past them, kicking up sparkles of snow. His neighing echoed off the rocks, a sound of pure life that made Kurt's heart swell. Together they watched him run, this small miracle that had brought them together, had helped bridge to worlds, and had shown them all the power of faith. And healing, the winter sun climbed higher, casting long blue shadows across the pristine snow. In those shadows, Kurt could see the tracks of many peoples coming together, boot prints, moccasin marks, and the delicate hoof prints of a young horse who had refused to die, all of them making new paths forward, side by side. If you believe, stories can heal, lift, and connect us. This channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.